So I am gonna keep it not too large of an image. I'm just gonna make it like a very quick, almost like a quick photo bash. So I would say this scenario is more in line with, let's say, you got a script or something, or you're in the process of very early visual development, and a director comes to you and says, like, could you come up with a few pictures to help define our film based on the select key scenes. So I'm just gonna use this Sketchfab screenshot as our base for the interior. I love using Sketchfab screenshots for interiors because I think interiors are one of the most taxing things to kind of create in any painting. But you know, it's by no means perfect, so the real trick is like how well you manipulate it to kind of suit your needs. So I'm just gonna extend the piece a little bit, extend the location of the hanger, just make it a little bit wider. I like to just clean that up early, that way it doesn't bite me, doesn't cause me trouble later. Okay, and something that I knew I wanted to do, and the reason why I chose this image because I really like this large opening here. It reminds me of very kind of classic Ian McKee Star Wars vibe. So what I really wanted was this opening, right? And I'm really going to downplay all the values in the end and just kind of stick to something very, very dark because I'm going to add the lights in manually. So immediately after I drop in like a texture or like in this case a Sketchfab element, I just want to hide the tracks. There's a lot of details that I think don't really suit the picture I had in mind, so I'm just kind of getting rid of that really quickly. And I'm just painting over it, keeping everything quite loose. So essentially just color picking and just getting rid of some of those construction elements. I also have a particular screenshot of a ship that I thought was quite nice. I try my best to match the perspective. See if it lines up. If it doesn't, we'll just go back in, rotate the camera a little bit and try again. So I think it lines up pretty well. Probably as good as I can ask for in this timeline. So yeah, not too bad for a first try. So seems to be lining up well. Again, I don't really want a lot of like the lights and stuff like that from the original model. So I'm just gonna do a quick update on this and simplify this design a little bit. It's a really cool model, but what I really want is just maybe about 20-30% of it. So it's gonna be a mix of like just painting over as well as reshaping some of these sections. This is where like my design aesthetics kind of come in. I'm looking for something more like District 9-ish, where it's just bigger boulder shapes, as opposed to not too many of these small micro details. It currently has too much of like a starship vibe to it. I want something that evokes the feeling of like a bus, really, a space bus. So the reason why like I started off saying like, okay, this is gonna be a painting that is based off like maybe future immigration or interstellar immigration. I do think like one of the most valuable thing about a speed painting like this from a client's perspective or a director's perspective is that it evokes story. So if you don't have a story to tell behind your painting, it's really just showing off Photoshop skills. So you want to make sure that you have something that you're trying to say, even how simple it is. So it could just be an aeroplane in a hangar, and that's fine. But if you're saying something, that's a little bit better, I think. So if you notice, like everything is extremely low key, low contrast, barely any values going on, and that's intentional. I want to keep all of my bash textures and bash elements as close of a value together as possible. So let's widen this ship a little bit, and I think the easiest way I can think of is this little trick that I developed, which is you duplicate that half, shift it a couple pixels, duplicate again, shift it a couple pixels. I want it to be like a nice fat bus, so it's gonna be quite thick. This is a great way to thicken up even, let's say, like weapons, anything like mechanical. You can probably do this. Right, but now like that part is fully extended, quite far out as well, which is great. And I'm thinking of adding another one of this guy. What do you call this? Like the engines. Just have to make sure like the perspective is tweaked accordingly. And at that distance, I'm probably just gonna freehand it, just paint it in. Okay, so my ship design is coming along. It started off based on someone else's 3D model, but I think I've worked on it enough that it's becoming definitely my own vision of what I want it to be. And because the focus of this painting is more about storytelling, I'm not gonna delve too deep into the actual design of the vehicle itself. Probably what I would do is like maybe if let's say they will want a more deeper dive into the vehicle design, and then I'll probably do a different concept packet. But this is purely kind of just for mood. Okay, so that's done. Let's start to block in our people. Got some nice textures here. So I just kind of put it in there just to see how it looks like, just to make sure like everything lines up, roughly speaking, perspective wise, and probably gonna see if there's any quicker way I can clean up this photo and extract them. Probably what I'll do is increase the tolerance a little bit, see if that helps. It's just a Photobash key art, so I think I can be a little bit sloppy with the selection. So I upped the contrast of the photo just so that it's easier for Photoshop to detect the value changes. So you can play around with both the tolerance and the sample size to kind of allow for a speedier selection. Obviously a larger sample size will force Photoshop to take more pixels than it's not used to. So that's great, like if you find like you can't seem to get quick selection. So I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to just do a rough lasso now and kind of get rid of the rest. Okay, so obviously I want from the low key version. That's a pretty decent selection, I think. Like, and again, because all the values are really low, it's easy for me to merge. Oh, but the child lost her leg. Give that back. Okay, let's bring in the second image. Same thing, just up the contrast so that it's easier for Photoshop to detect all the different values, and then do a very quick selection. This one I might even keep the shadows on the ground because I kind of like the way it looks. And this guy's head got selected by accident, so let me clean that up. If I was doing like a matte painting or something equivalent, I'll probably spend a little bit more time making sure this is clean. But for the sake of this demo and the fact that this is just more of a mood piece, I'm not going to delve too deep into that. Okay, let's have a few more coming out from the side here. So this is why I mentioned like storytelling is important, because it kind of gives your painting a little bit more meaning. And then, you know, obviously there is a subtext about what I'm trying to do here in terms of like, you know, a really heavily armored immigration center. So I'm gonna put some soldiers. This is actually a piece of, I think it's a video game asset, probably from a, I don't know what game, but I just want really the silhouette. So I'm gonna put these guys like stationed over here and just lower the contrast substantially. I'm gonna change his whole color scheme at some point. Might even turn them into robots or something, I don't know, still deciding. So just making sure these guys like line up scale wise the best I can. I'm probably gonna need another soldier looking guy kind of somewhere around here in the foreground, probably with a gun or something, just to kind of tighten the composition up. So let me just grab that real quick. So I just typed in soldier stock image. See if it gives me any luck. Ideally, you know, it's, if you're doing something like with a futuristic setting, it's good to kind of stick with modern day stuff. But if you can't find like just stock, then maybe try and go for very broad terms like soldier, maybe soldier standing, and see if we can find one that matches our sketch initially. Oh, I forgot. I'm gonna add just back view. This might work. Oh, right, sorry. Let me show you how to get rid of the watermark. So let's say you have an image like this. If you want to get rid of the watermark, just make sure you merge it to the point where it has this padlock, and that means that it's layer locked. It's a background image. Right? This only works with the background. So just select all the watermark. You can use what do you call it? The magic wand as well if you want. Maybe set it to like 5, and you can do it like this if it's something small, but I think this one, because it's quite a big word, I'm just going to use a lasso roughly. Press delete, and then it automatically open up the fill, set it to content to where everything default, and then it will help you get rid of that. So very useful if you just want to quickly clean up your texture images. Okay, so now it's royalty free. But in all seriousness, because we're really just making use of a little bit of the silhouette and things like that, so I would say it's a fair use of a texture. And the amount of changes that I'm going to do to it and the context of it being totally different, it should be fine. Just going to paint in the remainder of the silhouette and get rid of that. And you will see me like skewing the textures that I put in every now and then, because like I need to remember that the perspective of this painting is actually at a slight angle. It's actually a Dutch angle kind of a picture, so just to make sure like all the textures I put in are correctly aligned with this camera. Okay, so I think I roughly have all of my pieces in place. What I need to figure out now is lighting. All right. So once again, this is why I like to keep my paintings fairly neutral, because I like to. I find it easier for me to light when I do it this way. So one of the light source I know that I wanted was a very Star Wars is light coming from the outside, so it's like just the perimeter of the frame, something like this here. And it's important to define that, because if let's say this is a dark room, that blue light is going to start to kind of reflect across the rest of the interior. So this is why I like to tackle my lights one by one. So let's go to airbrush and set it to color dodge. So it's almost like a backlit scenario. So I'm just gonna adjust the values of all of these people here. Make sure they're according to the right depth percentage as well as the value wise and hue. Let's also work on the drop shadow with this big ship. So fairly simple value groups. Nothing too crazy lighting wise. I want to just integrate everything that I have in this scene first. So you start to see like the whole painting will gradually have more and more contrast over time. And I'm being very methodical about it. I don't want to jump ahead too quick with the light. You know, I just want to tackle each light little bit by little. And I found out that this is a much easier way to handle very complex lighting scenes. So let's just focus on this soft blue light coming from the back first. Now just using the dodge tool and just kind of picking that up really quickly. Okay, so just kind of slowly integrating whatever I have. Making sure like some of these textures or bash elements are just blending in with the rest of the picture. Everything is intentionally still very hazy. That's the whole point. I don't really want to jump too far in with terms of like heavy lighting yet. Okay, so we have the backlight kind of set up at the moment, and I'm still very conservative about the lighting. So let's start to add some additional lights to this scene. Let's add some ceiling lights, like good old sci-fi-ish ceiling lights. gonna try and keep them as thin as possible because that should help with the realism of it. And these are actually gonna be quite high powered lights, and they're gonna take up quite a bit of value, but I wanted to do this kind of closer to the end because I wanted to make sure all my photos are gelled together well first before I did this, and I'll show you really soon like why that's the case, because each of these white sections that I'm adding on is going to be quite a strong direct light, and if we're not careful with this, you might just be putting a white dot that is actually not affecting any light at all. So I'm being very methodical about where I put the lights, making sure that it's really going to affect the scene. Okay, so we have these few light sections, and essentially like what I need to do now is figure out like how is this like affecting the surface that is around. So each of these holes has like a fluorescent light tube, and it's going to affect mainly the inner part here. So I'm actually using the lasso to kind of hand pick these walls, making sure that they get sufficient light. And I'm also taking into consideration the depth, so the value here will be brighter than this one because this is pushed further back. I'm also going to start to take in consideration the softer ambient bounce light. So this light is traveling out, might hit this pillar a little bit, but at a lower intensity of this guy. But I also want to maybe suggest some shine, so I'm going to make this just a little bit shinier. So the reflectivity of the surface affects the percentage of the shine. So you're going to get more here from the door and a strong hit from the light here. Next is these guys. So these guys are mainly going to affect this wall first. So let's kind of let them have radial illumination around there. And they're going to affect this wall second. So I'm going bit by bit based on the shape of the 3D object. And finally this pillar here. Next they're going to cause a little bit of a bloom. And I would imagine that there is actually some lights behind this surface as well. Off camera. And probably one off camera somewhere around here, so it might just bleed a little bit. Another light here, so it might be somewhere around here, so just let it bleed out. Next is this very bright fluorescent tube, so these are gonna emit quite a bit of light, so I'm gonna make sure that they're well illuminating. And they're going to affect this wall. So it's not a random dodging everywhere, you know, not randomly adding light. There's kind of like a system to it, depending on the strength of the light as well, plays a very big part. So these smaller lights probably won't be as intense. But it's literally two tools I'm cycling with right now: lasso and dodge tool, highlight, set to highlight mode. Okay, I have a choice now, like how far do I want to bump up the contrast value. Another thing I do want to play with is actually just a really reflective ground. I've always liked that Star Wars look where the Empire had like this ultra polished, shiny floor, which is very impractical, but it's kind of like in IKEA where the basements are really smooth, the parking lot. Since my lights are quite cool, so I'm just going to tint the whole thing a little bit bluish. And let's start to, so the aeroplane was not affected by the lights at all, so let's change that. The ship is obviously kind of like a big focus of the design, so I want to make sure that I get some nice high key lights on it, really make it pop. Okay, how are we doing with time? Hold on. Got about 30 minutes left. So we started at around, what time did we start? I think we started around just before 1 p.m. So we're about like 30 minutes in, 40 minutes in. And we actually essentially have a picture that tells quite a decent story lighting wise already. And you could show this to a client pretty early on. You could do like 3-4 of this, within like a sitting to kind of get someone's perspective on whether they like this setup or not, whether they like the overall lighting and how everything is coming along. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of like bring up some of the lighting on the refugees themselves, making sure that there's sufficient light on them. I just want to make sure that they have the right depths, the right values to kind of push them forward in the painting, because they're like actually the main subject. The ship is just it's like that looming object behind them, but they're the main focus of this painting. Just gonna apply a surface blur to these characters here because actually, you know what, maybe a paint dubs instead. I don't really want their design, I just want their silhouette yeah, what I really want is just their silhouette. And I want to make sure like they're integrated into the scene lighting wise. So after, let's say, this painting is approved, I can probably go in and just flesh this out a little bit further. Alright, so let's bring in some graphics. Don't know if I'll get into trouble for you doing this, but let's see. I mean, the world has always been quite a political climate, right? So it should be fine. But you know, but it's just like a little what if scenario, right? Like what if this, right? So let me just tone that down so only the But I love adding graphics because if you really look around you, right, like a lot of times, like everyone's costumes or uniforms or designs of the environment is actually pretty simple, but the graphics are quite complex because it's actually we're obviously a species that needs to read text to understand what it is. And you can get a long way by just focusing more on graphics instead. And it adds so much more value to the storytelling once you start to implement some pictures like this. I'm probably ruffling a lot of feathers because I'm not really even sure, like, is this even the right department for this? But you know, again, it's just a very loose what if scenario. And I do want like additional texture to boost up my image. So let me look at hanger floor. Set this to large. Because as much as I would like to paint that, I do think getting a photo for that will be a much better solution. And I'm also looking for something with a little bit of texture. Maybe something like this is quite nice. Has like a nice yellow line. Has a lot of nice reflections on it. It's quite similar to where we are. This is also pretty good. I like the patterns here. I might want to merge it with the other one. Path too long. Print screen instead. Alright, but I'm sure the photo will just kind of boost the level of realism. And I just need to make sure like the perspective lines up with my rest of my scene. So gonna be a little bit of stretching and pulling here to get it to line up. Let's bring this in as well. I think this one has the right idea of scale as well, which is good. Probably set this to multiply, just get some noise going on. Make sure I rasterize this smart object. I don't need it to be a smart object. So now our ground has some nice texture to it. So let's just keep working on integrating some of these photo elements in. There is only like 3 things that would, well actually 4 things. The first one is perspective. The second one is the value. The third is the shadow and light. Sorry, the third is the light and then the fourth is the shadow. So now I'm just making sure like the shadow on the ground just kind of lines up value wise. And I'm also going to increase the depth on this ship, because at the moment the depth is a little bit shallow. Not so much of a fan of this space opening anymore, but let me tone this down and see. Let's try out a few different ideas. Yeah, I kind of like that outdoor look a bit more. Oh, you know what? I'm going to use this. So let's just bring this in. Kind of because all of the characters actually look pretty grounded so far. So I think to suddenly have like a very Star Wars-y space scene, it's a little bit off-putting in my opinion. Okay, just adjusting the values. Sorry, adjusting the hues. Overall family hue. I'm kind of tinting everything just a little bit blue because the fluorescent lights that I put in are quite cool. Okay, so coming along well. I think now I just need to massage everything in, make sure all the values line up. So one of the quick ways to check is once you've flattened everything, or just you can check, create a duplicate flatten layer. I'll just go to image adjustments and threshold. And threshold is just a nice way to check your value groups. So ideally you want a very clean arc, either this direction or this direction. So right, so because this is where basically all most of my values are somewhere around here. So this will kind of let you know like how is your value structure working. So at the first glance, I think I know what I need to fix. Definitely this area is still too dark for the depth because it's bleeding into our foreground element. I also probably want to add some smoke elements here to soften that up, and some smoke elements here to soften this up. So in general, I'm just kind of making the whole scene a little bit hazier, more light bleeding. Just kind of make everything pop a bit better. Just these soldiers are just a little bit problematic for me at the moment. Still deciding on what's the correct value group for them. Probably what I can do to help is just maybe introduce a little bit more lights in this piece. So let's try adding a light strip here to kind of guide them to where they should walk. I think that should help the painting a little bit, give it some clarity. And I want to make this like nice and thin so that it fits to scale, because I notice if you make things too thick, it kind of creates this Tron look and like a very fake off-scale look. So things in real life I found out tend to be much thinner than they are, than what we perceive them to be. So always err on the side of trying to make things a little bit thinner. So that little light strip will help me quite a bit, because now I have an excuse to just introduce a little bit more bounce light on these guys, and that will help integrate them into the scene better, I think, because at the moment they're a little bit floaty. You know what, I should have switched this off early on. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so my brush now is just set to a color dodge, and I'm essentially just making sure that all of these refugees, they're kind of lit correctly, because remember the photo that we got was quite a bright outdoor image, but we're changing the whole light setup to a interior lighting. So there's obviously going to be some discrepancies if you're not careful, but you can see what that light is doing, kind of really helping them integrate into the scene much better. And I can probably do the same for these guys. So the trick I found to kind of adding the right hue and value for lights on a character is like set your brush to color dodge, and then you pick the lightest or the middle tone value of this using a eyedropper, and then when you actually paint in that value, you notice that it won't be such a sudden jump. You definitely don't want to pick white and do it because it might be too strong, but picking like the middle tone and working your way up, you get a much softer and usually a more accurate value to build up the lighting. And this works really well for illustrations and quick key art pieces. So pick the middle tone of that area and then just kind of work in the values. Only like on when you're pretty confident with an area can you just pick like the kick light itself, the light source, and just work that in. But I will do this sparingly because it sometimes is just a little bit too powerful. I'm just adding a paint dubs on this background crowd, just to make sure that their texture is blurry enough that it makes them feel like they're far away. don't like these soldiers. Something about them is just not right. Okay, so I am just really trying to get all the textures to line up. I noticed some areas like the textures are too bright. The depth, I feel like I want to push it a bit more. Currently, like at least it looks like there is just a very nice kind of fog across the entire scene. So the picture is coming along pretty okay. I just want to make sure like some of these hot spots or like bright, overly bright spots are kind of reduced. And I probably need some boost in texture, so probably just in the format of lights. This is a pretty nice one. We got 10 minutes left, so that's fair. Little ghost kit. So this is just the light emitting a fog, and it's just gonna give like some extra, a little bit extra atmosphere to the whole piece. Okay, so this last two lights that I've just added on the ship, these two big ones. is going to affect the lighting of the scene quite a bit, because they're kind of like a floodlight from the aeroplane, and I like the intensity of it, so I'm definitely going to commit to this. So what I need to do is just make sure that there's sufficient lighting information hitting everything else. So should be a nice contrast here, and make sure like all of these little details are being hit by the light, and it's probably even going to reach our soldier man here. So this should give me some nice high key lighting, because it's a pretty strong spotlight. It's probably also going to hit some of these refugees in the back of the head. Finally, I just want to add an extra pattern on the ground here. Again, I'm not sure if this is normally what people do, because some countries don't like you stepping on their logos. Again, this is a very what-if situation. It's a parody of reality, obviously. Yeah, I need to be very careful, because this is going to go up on YouTube. So I just want to stress that I'm in no way trying to send a critique to any country or organization out there. I'm merely a humble concept artist trying to make a picture. Okay, there's this thing called color lookup in Photoshop, which I like to fool around with. Sometimes it does give me some nice outcomes. I tend to like drop blues sometimes, or one of the Kodak film grades. So it's essentially a free grading effect. But in this case, I might just leave it empty. Probably nothing. So that's fine. I'm gonna merge the whole thing and try some auto-tone because again, this is a school monitor, so I'm not sure if the tones are correct. Auto contrast, auto color. Color is a little bit too warm after the adjustment. I think I'm fine with my version. And let's just double check our threshold again. Yeah, okay, there we go. I'm kind of more happy with this because you can kind of see like there's a clear separation in the bottom half, the lower half. And the 1, 2, 3, 4 elements are all in place, which I like. So probably what the threshold is trying to show me as well is that the value for this particular part of the ship is just too bright. I mean, too dark, sorry. Let's lower that a little bit. Okay, let's see if the threshold is improved. Yep, a little bit better. So the depth seems to be working fine. Probably want to push this further back a little bit. Okay, that's good. So just using the color correction, lens correction, sorry, tool in Photoshop, just kind of add a little bit of chromatic aberration. You know what that is that little pixel blurring at the edges that you find on screen. So it shifts the pixel. So if I were to increase it further, you're gonna see a much wider jump in colors there. So you can see with and without. This is before, this is after. It just gives you that little shift. Good for very, you know, filmic, cinematic look. Also recommend, you know, normally films there's always a little bit of grain, a little bit of noise. So I do like to add a bit of noise to kind of get that cinematic look. Set this to soft light and just very faint. To me, it adds a little bit of that realism. And these, oh man, these guards are really kicking my butt. They're still like floating in my opinion. Just work on their shadows a little bit. Okay, done.